Welcome to Haig's Business Winners, a club that brings together leaders, industry experts, entrepreneurs, startups, and those willing to share their business experiences and learn from others. Just like my podcast, Other Side of the Business Card, we explore business conversations with humanity, humor, and passion. Listen in as we uplift, motivate, and learn from each other.
Welcome to Haig's Business Winners. I'm Kev Walkin with a purple background that says Jonglers on it. Today we're talking about the power of corporate storytelling with Brian O'Keefe. This is going to be an interesting one. I'm looking forward to hearing this. I wanted to say thank you to everyone who's joined us. There's quite a few people. We've got some speakers and we've got some guests in the room as well. So Natalie, John, Brian, Nick, Rita, and Arto. Arto, how are you doing, my brother? So everyone's in the room here. If you're not following the room, please do go and click on that greenhouse right above Sharina's head. That now leads me on to saying hello to our moderators. And our guests on the stage, Sharina, who's a wonderful social media strategist and is part of the Haig's Business Winners team. Then we've got the beautiful Sarah Flindle. She's a chief of staff at Haig Barrett Partners. We've got Brian, who's our special guest today. So hello, Brian, welcome. And if you're not following him, please do follow him. We all do like to support all the people that do come into this room and all the guests that we feature on our show. Then we've got Paul Vatistas. He now is in a world of increasing uncertainty, he's put here, from both Marco forces like technology and short-term black swan events. Mate, you're brilliant. God bless you. Paul's an absolutely brilliant human being and he's on here every single Thursday at 1 p.m. Then we've got the gorgeous, smiley Julie Wong. She's a financial performance coach. If you want anything to do with finances, to grow your finances and profit, she's the woman to you call. And then finally, we've got Abigail Barnes. The day I read her book, I kid you not, it changed my life. Productivity strategist and online trainer she is, and her book's called Time Management Author. Time Management. She's the author of that book. She's brilliant. If you haven't read it, please do click on her profile, go to her Instagram, go to her Linktree or wherever she's got and buy that book. It's brilliant. Anyway, apart from that, I want to say massive hello again to all our guests below: Nick, Rita, Arto, Brian, Piyush, John, Natalie, Stan, Vanessa, and Toshi. Or Toki, it could be. But I wanted to say thank you to each and every one of you for being in this room. This happens every single Thursday at 1 p.m. Do join us every week. It's for an hour, and we really share some insights into incredible stuff to do with business, entrepreneurs, and scale up. So I'm going to pass it back over to Haig. Say, Haig, take the room, and I will be in the background doing a lot of moderating. Back to you.
Yeah, welcome everybody to this week's session of Haig's Business Winners. I am Haig Armagayan, a strategic advisor, CEO, and a podcaster. So again, this room brings in some of the leaders, industry experts, and entrepreneurs to share their business experiences and insights. And I'm very excited to be live from our London studio this week with a few of my, Paul is here and Abigail's here. And Brian O'Keefe is talking to us from the US. He's a corporate storyteller, and he's our very special guest. He specializes in leadership and communication. Brian has over 16 years of corporate storytelling experience and helps others connect complex ideas to audiences. Complex ideas to audiences is something that we do a lot also in our advisory firm. And like I said, we may actually need Brian's help. We were just looking through his stuff last night and we're like, wow, we actually need a lot of this as well. So excited to hear what he's going to say. He helps communicate in such a way that impacts decision-making and action. Welcome, Brian, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the invitation.
And I know you had to sign up on the platform, Brian, so I appreciate you doing that. Did you know what Clubhouse was before that?
I mean, I had heard of it. I heard it referenced in articles and other places, but I had never actually joined in and participated. So I'm glad you forced me to do that.
Great. Well, today we're going to be discussing, again, your main topic here, which is corporate storytelling. And with that, branching off into persuasion, decision-making, and how to keep others engaged in a post-pandemic world. I've had the pleasure of seeing Brian in action a few times, working we have some mutual clients, and I really think you're truly brilliant. So let's start with your background, Brian. How did you kind of get into the corporate storytelling field, and what did you do before that?
So my background is I'm a mechanical engineer, and I, at some point, while near graduation, realized I didn't actually want to be an engineer. And so I did what anybody in that position would do is I went and got my master's in engineering. And that was purely a stall
Okay.
tactic. But what happened is I got involved in teaching while getting my master's. And I learned that I liked working with people more than I liked working with things, I think. And so I went off, worked for this software company that made engineering software, and I was helping other engineers use our software. But eventually I got involved in more sales and marketing type roles at that company. And so I went from being more on the technical side, but still working with people, to being using my engineering background, using my like I'm interested in technical things. I get into nerd topics. I like that stuff, but like I said, I didn't want to actually build anything. So yeah, at some point while I was in that sales and marketing role, I got exposed to these concepts around corporate storytelling, and I became a big fan of it. It made a big difference in my career in that role, and then I continued to apply these skills in some other roles, but it was always in the engineering software space. And then, like you said, it was about 16 years ago that I left that industry and started, helping other companies, helping other people apply these concepts to their specific situations.
So was it crystal clear what you wanted to do, or was it pretty scary when you started out?
Uh, no, I mean, I had someone to follow. So what happened is there was somebody who had trained me on these concepts, and so I had his blueprint to follow. I went to work for him, and we're just kind of all, you know, there's four of us in the company that do this, and one of the guys that I followed, he was able to show me the way on how to get started. But so it wasn't scary from that standpoint, although it is scary from the standpoint of, when I told people what I was doing, they were like, "You're an engineer and you're at this software company. What do you, this is such a change. This is so different. What are you thinking?" But to me, it just made perfect sense. I felt like I was built for this. And so there was no doubt in my mind that this is what I should do with my life.
So Brian, I want to put you on the spot straight away because you're so good at this. Obviously, I'd be interested to know what's your own kind of elevator pitch around corporate storytelling, or it doesn't have to be even that quick. But I guess as we're starting out now, we have a lot of people jumping in to listen. How
Yeah.
how have you designed your own story to say? I mean, you can either use me as an example for an advisory firm, or we could use like I don't know, an oil and gas executive, which is something I deal with every day. What do you tell them that will mean that it's not just the usual blah blah, and they're like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I need that.
Yeah. So if if I avoid, the speech you'd give in a big moving metal box that's going up and down a building, maybe I'll go a little bit longer than that.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
one one of the ways I like to explain it, and there's a few angles you can come at this from, but there was a study I read about that some people may have heard about before, where there was a utility company. This was actually in Florida, down in southeastern United States. They offered a program where they would come to people's homes and they would walk around the home and they would give them advice on how to make their home more energy efficient. And Florida's really hot, so how can they lower their air conditioning bills? So, anyways, they offered this program. Hundreds and hundreds of people agreed to it. And so they went out, they started giving advice to all these homeowners, and then they ran a survey later and asked them, okay, how many of you did what we recommended? And any guess? How many people do you think did what was recommended? What percentage of people?
15%.
Yeah, actually, it was 17%. So pretty good
Wow.
guess, right? And we all know these types of things, right? Where you can give people advice, only a fraction actually act on the advice. So, anyways, the utility company said, okay, well, that's a failure, but we're not killing the program because we believe in it. We just got to figure out, why aren't they doing it, right? What's the problem? Because we know we're giving them valuable advice. We know these people will save money. So they went back to the drawing board and said, okay, it must be something to do with the way we're communicating the advice. So they came up with some ways to improve the way they communicate it. And they went back and ran the program again. Same thing. Hundreds of people took them up on it. They went out, gave the advice, and when they ran the survey that time, the number jumped up to 61%. So it's still not 100, but now it's 61%, almost 2/3. That was success for them. And to give you an example of what they did is one of the things they tried to do is they tried to make the advice and the problem that they're trying to solve more tangible to the homeowner. So, for example, if they found a crack around a door that was letting air in and out, instead of just telling them, hey, you have a crack, air is going in and out, you need to go put in weather stripping. And go to your local
Right.
hardware store and spend $10 and put it in.
Yep.
Instead, they would say to them, hey, see that crack over there? Now that might seem small, but if you add up all of the cracks like that, they would be the equivalent to a hole the size of a football in the wall of your house. And then they would walk over to the
Wow.
wall and they'd actually put their hands up on the wall and say, now imagine a hole this big in the wall of your house. How long would you let that hole sit there? And of course, the homeowner would say, well, I would, at a minimum, I put cardboard over it tonight, right? To make sure there's no air going in and out as best I can. And then I would do a real fix later. And then they would go on to explain, you need weather stripping, go here, buy it, spend $10. And it was little things like that where, depending on the problem they found, they had a way to communicate the problem or the solution in a way that was more tangible to people, and therefore people acted on it. And so when it comes to the companies I work with, it's the same idea, is that a lot of times it could be salespeople going and talking to potential customers. It could be an HR leader trying to explain to the employees why they're making a change to the healthcare plan. Whatever it is, people have to understand why things are happening, what the value of it is. But if they don't really appreciate, if you can't put it in a meaning that means something to them, or you can't put it in the context of their world, it's hard for them to say yes to things, or it's hard for them to accept something that might be negative news, for instance. So this is what we help with is, okay, how do you communicate it so that people get it? Does that help?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the football kind of size hole in the wall really kind of brings that home in terms of
Yeah.
finding a story that somebody can relate to instantly. And I know that a lot of the sales courses that I've done, it's about making the problem bigger than the obstacle, right? So again, when I've got to fix this small crack, it's going to be, well, I'll do it one day when I'm off, and I'm never off, right? When you make the problem so big in someone's mind, then they take action. So, in terms of, talk to me about the process and how hard that is, because I know a lot of us here on stage work with with corporate executives, and they're really busy. So, and you've got a pretty kind of hard and fast process, really, that you don't negotiate, right? That they've got to follow certain steps. So maybe tell us a bit about the process and how you manage to get people to implement it properly. Because I've actually met clients of yours who, 2 years later, we had to present something to the board, and they're going through your process, which I found amazing. And that's why, like I said, it certainly works, because you're not there forcing them to do it, and they remembered it. And I think you might give out some templates and things which they had, but I was pretty impressed with that.
Oh, that's good. I'll have to hear more details about the example you're talking about there. But uh, yeah, and it's not really. I don't want to say it's our process, although we do have a process, but it's really just based on how the brain works. So it in a way, we can't take credit for it. It's more that Mother Nature needs to take credit for it, and we're just using what we know about the brain. So I believe that everybody listening to this, um, in your job, one of the most important things to do in your job is to help other people make decisions. And I think it's also one of the most difficult parts of any of our jobs. And
I
again,
love
whether
that.
that's
Yeah.
whether we're talking to a coworker, we're talking to management, we're talking to a partner of ours or a customer, it's helping someone make a decision is not easy, because a lot of times you have it already formulated in your head. You have an opinion of how things should work. And the question is, other than just telling them what you think, is there a way to tell them what you think, but in a way that helps them arrive at the same conclusion as you? Or even if they don't agree with you, even if they better understand why you're saying what you're saying, it can just be a more productive conversation, and maybe there could be less divisiveness if there's like a tense situation. But it starts there. It starts with, okay, in my job, a big part of my job is helping other people make decisions. And then what we do is we help people just work backwards from there, which is, okay, well, how does the brain make decisions? What's the process for that? Now, I'm not a neuroscientist, and I'm not a psychologist. I have no background in that other than I've just read a lot of books. But the simple explanation that I like to give is that if you're trying to get to a decision, before people can make a decision, they have to learn something. All right, and it could be learned in terms of they don't know your idea, or they're not well versed in the idea, or they might know more about the topic than you do, but you're trying to teach them something new about it. Maybe there's some subtle addition you want to make to their level of knowledge that is going to affect the decision. So they got to learn something. Okay, all right, they got to learn something that makes sense. But before people are willing to learn, because learning takes effort, whether it's consciously putting an effort or it's unconscious, learning takes effort. In order to motivate somebody you're talking to put in the effort to learn, they got to be interested in what you're talking about. And I mean interested, it could be just in a general sense, are they interested, or also just in that moment, can you get them to be interested in the idea? But then before you can even get someone interested, you've got to first get their attention. You could have somebody staring right at you, or like right now, it's even more difficult, right? This is all verbal. It's even harder to keep people's attention when things are purely verbal, like a phone call or on Clubhouse here. What do you do to get someone's attention before that? And so we sort of work backwards from there to say, okay, the brain needs these four things. And so, all right, let's now feed them those things, but in that order. Let's do something to get their attention. Then let's do something that then gets them to be interested and engaged. Then we do some teaching, whatever teaching has to be done. Then they're equipped to make the decision. And so at a high level, that's what we're trying to do with people. And we like to say, remember, this was the founder, the guy who I followed into this. He used to like to say, I don't believe you can convince anyone to do anything. What I believe is if you give people the right information in the right way, they can convince themselves. And so when you say a process, yeah, we have a process for trying to give people what we would consider the right information in the right way.
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful. Just say that last one again. What he said, you can't convince.
Yeah,
No,
you can't convince anyone to do anything. What you can do is if you give them the right information in the right way, they can convince themselves. And
okay.
that's always stuck with me. He said that to me, 20 years ago when I was exposed to this before I ever joined the company. And yeah, that's I've always tried to take that approach. Is I'm not trying to convince them. I'm just trying to give them the right information the right way, and then I want them to convince themselves, either in the moment or after I'm gone. Right? Sometimes that has to happen when you're gone, when you leave the room, or the phone call's over. How do you get that information to linger in their brain?
Great. I'm going to ask one more question. I'm going to open up to the panel before we get to the halfway mark. And the question I was just going to ask is how has lockdown affected you in terms of the work that you've done, and how has this kind of, again, you help people make decisions. Has your process been the same now that more people are doing work on, say, on Zoom or Microsoft Teams than before? So have you had to kind of have a huddle with your team and rethink some of the process, or is it pretty much the same whether it's virtual or whether it's in person?
Yeah, it's actually been good for us in a way. I mean, there's been negatives to it, obviously, besides the whole societal, impact, which is, that's a given. But in terms of for our business, there's actually more demand for what we do. And I think there's even more of a need for what we do because your presence is so diminished in a Zoom call. And I like to break down communication into three components. There's your presence, there's the media that you use to show your audience things, like could be PowerPoint, could be you show them a white paper or you show them a demonstration or whatever. And then there's the message that you deliver. And those three components, the presence, the media, the message, those are all things that affect people's decision making. And when it comes to presence, when they're judging things like your body language or your voice and whatnot, these Zoom calls limit your ability to have a presence. And so, for instance, there might be a lot of people that were sold on charisma, or they sold on relationships.
Yeah.
And that's a lot harder to establish in this virtual world. And therefore, you can't rely on that as much. You can't get by on just that. You've got to deliver a message that really helps these people make a decision about what you're talking about. And so I'd argue there's even more of a need for it. And we're seeing that from people. Now, how did it affect us on the business side? Well, yeah, we went from doing 95% of our things in person to now doing, for a little while there, 100%. Now the pendulum's swinging back a little bit to doing more in-person stuff. But yeah, we, of course, we're doing everything virtual for the last 2+ years. But it actually was strangely good for us because it allowed us to help some companies that in the past I think we would have ignored because we were so busy flying all over the world, that now we were able to handle, because everything was virtual for a couple of years there. We were able to help a lot of companies that would have been maybe too small to fly to, or their group would have been too small to make it worth them bringing them together. But now that everyone's so much more accepting of virtual, we've been able to help a lot of people. So there's been positives to the last 2 years in terms of what we've been doing.
Excellent. Really, really excellent. If Kev's around, I was going to maybe do a quick reset before we go to the panel so that we can restart after that with questions from the panel. And then I know a couple of you have questions in the audience. We're going to come to you very, very soon. So, Kev, are you around?
I am. I'm here, and I'll take over right now. No problem, Haig. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Haig's Business Winners. I'm Kev Hawkin with the purple background. Today, we're talking about the power of corporate storytelling with Brian O'Keefe. You've been listening to him already share some of his great insight and experience. And it's absolutely wonderful to get such a great heads up on different ways of thinking as well. So bless you there, Brian, and you're absolutely fantastic. So let me introduce the panel. First of all, it's Haig's Business Winners. So the main man is right at the top there in the turquoise background. That's Haig Armaganian. Not only is he a good friend of mine, of course, and one of my best mates, but he's a trusted advisor and a co-pilot to C-level executives driving growth and transformation. Next to him is Sharina. She is a fantastic social media strategist. Then we've got Sarah. She's chief of staff at Haig Barrett Partners. So we've got an entire team here of Haig's Business Winners. Then we've got Paul Vatistas, another great guy who visits us every single Thursday at 1:00. He's an absolutely massive hero to Haig Armaganian. And he's a business leader looking at putting consultancy work into B2Bs. So that's Paul there for you. Then we've got Julie, the beautiful, smiley Julie Wong. She's a financial performance coach. You want to make more money? Go to her. Abigail Barnes. She's a time management author. I've read the book. If you haven't read it, go straight to her profile and click on and buy the book. Honestly, you will not be sorry. Then next to her, we've got Shailis Carew. He's a founder and CEO of Oclas Group, and he's an angel investor, serial entrepreneur, and a strategist consultant. Thank you, Shay, for joining us, my man. And finally, on top stage, we have Kurt Larson, educational consultant and executive coach. These guys are here every single week in, week out at 1 p.m. on a Thursday. Wanted to say a massive thank you to everyone who is listening in right now, from Rita, Brian, Piyush, Dave, Stefan, Arto, John stand for Lakey, and Sarah, or for Lake. I think that is more known. So I apologize for Lake if I have said your name wrong. But thank you so much. You're a female leader in corporates. So that's brilliant to have you here as well. Thank you so much. And finally, we have Sarah as well. She's a power coach. So bless each and every one of you. If you want to come up and ask a question to any of our moderators, and of course, Brian, our special guest today, Brian O'Keefe, then please put your hands up. I think we have Stan in the audience already putting his hand up. I will bring you up in a short moment, Stan. In the meantime, I will pass you back onto Haig Armaganian. In the meantime, before I do that, if you're not following Haig Armaganian's podcast, then you need to follow it. It's a fantastic podcast. We've been very, very excited about putting it together, and there's been great listens already on it. And it's called The Other Side of the Business Card, and it's available on Apple and on Spotify. So please do go and check that out. Haig, back to you, buddy.
Yeah, thanks, Kev. And just to say, Kev was the producer of the 2 series of podcasts that I've done, and we're now looking to produce a 3rd series, actually using Clubhouse as a platform to record. So it's really great. Just a couple of things on the books here. I think Abigail sold out of her book, haven't you, Abigail? So you may have to get an out of stock copy of somebody for 10 times the price unless she reprints. But I know Abigail's been done really well with her book. And then just a quick plug for Kurt. Kurt, who you see, wrote a book with one of my business partners, well, actually our business partner, Hans Samuel, called Radical Corporate Agility or Business Agility. And that book came out about a month ago, which is a fantastic book if you're in corporate. And if you're looking for that, then let's get some information. I want to see some flash of the mics from some of the people on stage before we go to the people who are coming up to ask questions. Who wants to go first on my team? So Paul from the Hague Business Winners, and then Kurt, and then Abigail. So why don't we have Paul, Kurt, and Abigail first, and then we'll spread it out. Go ahead, Paul.
Fantastic. Hey, Brian, thanks for joining today. My question really is around in the kind of stories that I go to tell to companies when you're trying to convince them to follow a certain course of action. There are always other people telling a slightly different story or might have a slightly different agenda, particularly within large companies. How would you deal with that, address with that? Obviously, there's some syndication that you do before the event if it's a decision meeting. But how do you deal with the voices that are telling other stories, in the same environment where you're trying to tell your story?
Yeah, that's a good question, Paul. And, a real quick answer could be, well, the more powerful story wins. All right. But it's not that simple. There's when we say corporate storytelling at our, in our area, it's actually an umbrella that encompasses several things that make up, delivering your ideas to people. And stories are one vehicle you can use to convey the information. So in a general sense, you hear the word storytelling all over the place. It's a very popular buzzword, and everyone's trying to, tell their story. However, sometimes your story just might not be good enough, right? The story, for instance, a lot of companies will come to us and say, well, we want to tell our company story. Well, if I go back to the thing I mentioned earlier about, okay, well, before people make a decision, they got to learn, but before they learn, they got to be interested. And then before they're interested, you got to get their attention. A good story should potentially tick off all 3 of those boxes. It should grab people's attention, it should get them interested, engaged, and then it should teach them something. However, some companies will work with and will realize, look, no offense, but that is your company story, or like in your case, the specific story you're telling at that moment. It might be a story that handles the learning piece, like it might educate the audience, but is it really interesting? Is it something that would get someone to look up from their phone? Is it something that if they were driving and daydreaming, suddenly while they're hearing your story, it grabs them? That's the tough question. And so when I see the most powerful story wins, some stories are just engaging. They create curiosity. They might even be shocking, And therefore, that's the one that's going to stick with people. That's the one that's going to get them more emotionally involved. Now, if you're stuck in a situation, though, where, you know what, the story I'm trying to tell does accurately portray what I believe is happening, but it's not that interesting, well, you got two options. Either A, is there a way to make the story more interesting? And there's just without embellishing, we don't want to be dishonest, but are there ways to pull some levers that make the story more interesting? Or there are other tools to try to make your point in an interesting way, that, in other words, you can take that idea of get their attention, get them interested, and teach them. You can use different tools to handle those different steps. It's just storytelling. What makes storytelling so valuable, the reason why humans have used it for the existence of the spoken word, is because stories can have potential to kill several birds with one stone when you're communicating with people. So you got to ask yourself, is it maybe just that story isn't going to be as interesting enough, and maybe I can use some other tools to get people interested before I get to using my story for, say, the learning piece. So it may just be a matter of, hey, you got a great story, then let your story be the one that's going to win because it's so powerful. But if you're assessing it and you're saying, my story's not that great, like it's not something that they're going to remember later tonight or 2 weeks from now. Okay, well then let's lean on some of the other tools to try to plant a memory in their brain that'll keep working on them after you're done.
So,
Does that
yeah,
help?
Yeah, that's helpful. And I guess one quick follow on, if I may, that was very helpful, because I think that is a situation we all find ourselves in at some point. But my follow on question would be, it also seems to me, in my experience, what you say in the first 2 minutes in a lot of these conversations has a massive impact on whether anybody cares what you say later. Is that something that you have experienced or feel, or have any tips on how to do that better?
Yeah, so what we do is we teach people a concept that's called framing. And framing is where within a minute or less, maybe you could break that rule a little bit, go a little longer, but the idea is within a short period of time, you accomplish two things. You get people to pay attention, all right, and you like, for instance, get them to look up from their phone, or even if they're staring at you, you get them to really open up their brain, open up their thalamus, which is sort of the gatekeeper of the brain. And yet at the same time, you deliver what we call a perspective. And for instance, commercials do this all the time. Like, now some do it better than others, but you'll notice like some commercials in 30 seconds, they grab your attention and they make a point at the same time. And then they finish the commercial off by basically saying, go to this website, or, they just want you to know their product name, whatever it is. But they're accomplishing two goals in a good commercial: getting you to be interested, and yet delivering a perspective and giving you a point of view on things. For example, let's say the person you're talking to thinks what you're talking about is going to be expensive. Like, that is their perspective. They see it as expensive. Your perspective, and the perspective you're trying to get them to come around to, is, look, it does cost money, of course, but it's an investment. All right, it's not an expense, but an investment, or it's going to pay off in the long run. Okay, now how do I deliver that perspective, but in an interesting way? And that's where we start to lean on different tools for doing that. And like I said, some stories can do that. Some stories can deliver your point of it's an investment for the long term in an interesting way. But now if you say, well, I don't have a good story to make that point, okay, let's lean on some of the other concepts for doing that. And there's multiple ways to do it, but we call that framing the conversation, or framing your message.
Great, thanks.
Yep.
yeah, I love the framing concept, and it's something that I'm going to try and talk to you about a bit later on. But I just had a quick question before I go on to Kurt, which was, you've obviously done a lot of these kind of workshops or interventions, projects with clients. Have you had cases where really you can't get something interesting out of them, kind of, in all these years? Because I mean, there must be areas where maybe something is so dull you can't, or is it pretty much there's a formula and you can make anything exciting?
Yeah, I've found that we can make anything interesting and exciting. You really can. But like I said, you borrow. If your story isn't inherently interesting, or if your idea, because like some ideas are sort of going to sell themselves, right? We've all experienced that where we saw something, no one even had to explain it to us. We instantly were like, I want that. I know that's going to be valuable. But that comes along once in a lifetime, right? That's pretty rare. Typically, you have to make it interesting. And this is where you can borrow interest from other things. Like, for instance, one customer, in order to make his point, he told the story about his grandpa and how he escaped being a prisoner during World War II. And then he used it to make a point. And I can get into the details of what exactly he did there. But because his
Right.
concept wasn't inherently interesting, he made his point in the context of talking about his grandpa, then he related it to his topic and what the real perspective that he wanted to deliver about his idea, his technology. And then and he's told me, like, in that case, customers, 2 years later will bring up the story of his grandpa. And the main thing is they remember his point, and that's what he wants, right? I want them to remember my point. And if I got to borrow from my grandpa to do that, I'm going to borrow from my grandpa to make that happen.
Actually, I like that. And I've got a lot of stories from my grandpa, so I might steal
Yeah.
that one. I want to go over to Kurt in the interest of time. I want to have all the questions in. So, Kurt, over to
Yeah.
you in Sweden, I guess. Is that where you are?
Yes, indeed.
Hi, Kurt.
Well, Brian, thanks a lot. You don't sound like you're from London either.
No, no, yeah, you sound very American.
Yeah, just more comments, but actually, I'd be interested in a little feedback on my comments.
Yeah.
First, I really enjoyed and when I came in here a little bit late. Sorry for that, but you mentioned that if they get the story told correctly, that they'll think that they made the decision. And you mentioned, I believe, quoted somebody, but I just sort of want to underline that Lao Tzu, about what is it, 4,000 years ago, he basically said the same thing: go to the people, learn from them, and when they and when they go into action, they'll say, "I did it myself." So yeah, it's a time tested tradition.
Yeah,
So there,
absolutely.
that was the first thing. But the second thing is, and this is sort of fun talking with a storyteller, because my love is conscious body language. And I've always heard this wonderful thing that presentation is 50% content and 50% delivery. And I'm just wondering if that formula works for you, and any comments about the importance of body language, or excuse me, there's body language and then there's conscious body language. There's the wonderful expression, lights on and nobody's home. There's stuff that, yeah, we can go into some other time. But yeah, any feedback from you regarding that mix?
Yeah. So that was like earlier, I was referring to presence and how, like, with these Zoom meetings, the effect or the impact your presence can have on the audience, whether that's a positive impact or a negative impact, the impact it can have in a Zoom meeting is diminished. And yeah, body language is a big part of that, right? Our voice is still part of the equation, but when it comes to these virtual meetings, but even if we go back to in-person settings, you think about those situations where you're in the conference room, or you're standing in the lobby and you're talking to somebody. Yeah, body language is a big component of that presence piece. And now, whether it's 50-50, you know, I saw some research where it pointed out that when somebody doesn't know you, you're a stranger to them, where your presence, which body language is a piece of, and then your voice is another piece of that, it does end up being a large chunk of it. Whether it's over 50% or around 50%, I've seen numbers where they try to assess how big of a factor that is. But I have seen the scale shift a little bit, where when people know you, whether it's a coworker or it's a customer that you've worked with, previously, or even if it's somebody who's only met once before, that number starts to fall. They start to rely, like when they're assessing you and your ideas, they will rely less and less on body language the more they know you. So, the number does fall, is from what I've seen. Have you seen anything like that where it breaks down stranger versus somebody you know well?
No, but I referred before to this milestone study back in 1966 of Abraham Morabian, who talked about that, what was it, 7% is the words, the 38% approximately is the um, breathing or the projection of those words, and then the rest is he talked about facial expression, but I would just basically say
Mm-hmm.
everything else.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so that
Actually, go ahead.
yeah, and just to wrap this up, when I say delivery, that can be also include PowerPoint and any kind of tools that you're using too. So it's not just body language, but that and the presence. I mean, there's a wonderful expression in present time. It's present time. So in other words, the more
Mm-hmm.
you're present, the more gifts you get. So that's a one that I love too.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, and it's that the study you referred to, that's one of the ones, that same breakdown is the same study I've seen. But like I said, there is a second step to that where I don't know if somebody redid the same study or if it's a follow on from the same researcher. That's where they showed that there is a difference when people know you, which is interesting. But it's still a factor. It's still a huge factor. Yeah, body
Yeah.
language is always part of the equation.
Well, I guarantee you all that the audio here is a lot more important because we're on an audio app. So there's nothing to look at except the picture. So probably 80% here is voice. So let's keep talking. But thank you for that, Brian. And thanks Kurt for that as well. It's kind of it's made me think in terms of how we present on Zoom. Abigail, over to you. I think you were next for the question, then I'll go to Piyush and then Stan, and then any of the other people on stage who want to comment can comment as well. So Abigail.
Oh, yeah, we go.
Hey, Brian. Oh my goodness, this conversation is absolutely amazing, and I could talk for hours about it. So my question is really just feeding into something that was mentioned just before around the whole storytelling and where you actually, as a corporate organization, perhaps if we just really focus in on like consultancies and smaller businesses versus large corporates, where your guidance would be around how much of your own personal story to use and how much not to focus on it. Because I know from my point of view, like being a partner with Haig and Haig Barrett Partners is his story and his family story he just mentioned about his grandfather. I just really, really resonated with that. And when he shared it, it made me feel even more connected to the mission that he has for his organization. And that was why I wanted to work with him as a partner. So I guess my question is really like, how much of that should you be using in this day and age? And how much of sort of the generic corporate story should we be using? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, if I go back to the comment I made earlier about framing the conversation and how a frame has two components. There's what perspective am I trying to communicate? And then how do I make that interesting? How do I make that memorable for people? Whether or not you choose a personal story or a corporate story, or again, you could use a story from someone that's not even you. You could borrow a story from the Apollo moon landing. I mean, there's lots of places you can go for the story. I still try to coach people on step one is what perspective are you trying to communicate? And then the question is, once you've decided, okay, the point I want to make is this. Then when we go to the next step of, okay, what story do I use as the vehicle to deliver that perspective? Then it's a matter of which one does the best job of that. And look, if your personal story can do that, great. Use your personal story. If the company story can do that, great. If the story of the Apollo moon landing can do it, great. I don't want to funnel you into either direction because it really depends, because it'll change, right? Sometimes your personal story do a great job of making a point, and then the next time you're trying to make a different point, the personal story just doesn't relate to that. It doesn't set you up to make that point. Now, having said all that, let's pretend there's a tie. Let's pretend the company story and the personal story both can deliver the message and deliver the perspective. They can both do it in a very interesting way, and we have to break the tie. I would typically choose the personal story because I think the more the audience feels connected to you, the closer they feel to the idea. I think it's harder for an audience or for a listener to feel connected to a corporation or a company. I think it's easier for them to feel connected to a person. So if you can use your personal story and get the job done, it's a way to implicitly introduce yourself to them some and show them a little bit about you, whether it's, a story about something you did with your kids or something that happened to you in your childhood. It's giving them a glimpse of you. And I think that's more likely to create an emotional connection than understanding something about the company. What do you think?
I absolutely love that. And I am so grateful that in this day and age that we can do this more and it's more accepted, because connection is how we build relationships, as you were saying. So thank you so much. I'll hand the mic back to Haig.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I'm not going to ask you any more questions. We're going to run out of time, but I'm interested to know with some of the things you just said there, whether there's some NLP in there as well. But that might be like a separate question at the end if we have time. But I don't know if Piyush is back. I want to jump over to you to give him a chance to share his question. Piyush, are you there? If not, I'll jump to Sarah. Thank you, Sarah, for coming back and waiting. Going, gone. So, Piyush is back. Okay, go ahead, Piyush.
Guys, thanks for the opportunity here. Great listening to you. Great room. I was just curious about corporate storytelling and the matter that sometimes these stories can be exaggerated in telling and perpetuating certain times things that are beyond truth. So, what are the controls? What have you seen? And where are we going with this? Again, I want to see if there are any stories about where corporate fibs have been caught by you. That's it. Is the Piyush.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know if I have a good answer on how to control it. I think it takes some discipline when you're working on your own. Now, this is part of my job. Like I find when I'm working with a company, I believe it's part of my job to poke at that, right? If I feel like, and not even if I feel like it, even if I don't suspect it, as we're trying to, let's say we're working on a frame for something, for example, it's part of my job to say, well, yeah, but is that accurate? Like, is that appropriately representing what's really happening? Um, but when I'm working on my own, where I'm just sitting in my office and working on my own thing, let's say I'm going to give a talk somewhere, I have to do that to myself, right? And I don't have a good answer for you on how to try to protect yourself from fibbing or exaggerating. Although I will say that I think a lot of audiences know that they can take your idea, take your story as they realize you're using it as a tool to help them, right? I think that they could take it a negative way and see the worst, but I think there's some level of understanding from the audience that, hey, you're just trying to make a point, and I get what you're trying to do, but I'm not sure how to tell you how to protect yourself against it. That's a good question.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Piyush, for that question. Are you okay?
Yeah, thank you. Maybe we'll have a follow-on conversation. I'll give you a follow. By the way, I live in the Silicon Valley, and as a technologist, I always used to think that, hey, I am a technologist all my life, but invariably, you are thrown in situations where you become the salesperson, when you become the marketing person, and then you face the problem that I just raised. So that's where.
Yeah. Well,
We'll-
let's have a side discussion. I'd like to hear the specifics of what you're talking about.
Yep, will do.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Take
good.
care.
Thanks.
Brilliant. Over to you, Sarah, if you're still there and ready with your question or comment. Welcome to Haig's Business Winners.
Oh, hi. Hello, thank you. I'm sorry if you could hear the noise in the background. I'm driving and I just pulled over. I'm the power coach and I help women step back into their power. And my question is, and I'm not sure if this is appropriate question. If it's not, I'm sorry, but it's a question I need answering, so I'm going to ask it. I'm not. I've never been in corporate, but I'm drawn to work with women who are in corporate that are stepping out of their power daily. And because I've never been in corporate, I don't know how to get a foot in. I mean, I know I can email HR and things like that. I wondered if anybody had any advice for me of how I get, how I connect, the best way to connect.
Yeah, and do you mean from a sales and marketing standpoint, like you're trying to market what you do to people that are in corporate? Is
Yes.
that what you're asking about, sir?
Yes, that's exactly it. I'm trying to market what I do to women specifically who are in corporate, and women who are I can't speak properly, specifically at the top. Those are the women that I'm marketing towards. But as I've never been in corporate, I don't know, apart from sending emails, I don't know how to get in, to connect.
Yeah, I will not claim to be an expert on helping women in corporate specifically, but I will say from a business standpoint, in terms of what I do, I live and die by word of mouth. And the only way you can start positive word of mouth is by helping somebody. And so step one is find somebody to help, and maybe start with a friend where you don't have to talk to some stranger at some corporation and try to get them to let you help them, right? Because they may not want to invest time working with you if they don't know you, if they don't trust you. So is there somebody you do know who does trust you, who will let you use as a test case? And that can be step one in having some proof that you can help, but also that becomes some word of mouth where then maybe they talk to somebody else. But that if you can't start, you have to start somewhere. I don't know if cold calling people at corporations is really going to lead to anything. I think you have to start by offering your services for free to help somebody, and then that's step one.
Yeah, that's a good answer, Brian. And Sarah, maybe I can just add from my view. You need to find potentially some nonprofits that attract a lot of corporate people. So again, if you've got certain specialty, I know in America, it was when I lived in Los Angeles, that there was a PR firm that specialized solely on getting a lot of executives. So, for example, if Chase Bank moved to a new state, they would put all their execs into boards of whatever they're interested in. So, some might be around a kind of medical rehab thing. Some might be around using horses to do something. Something might be a hospital board. So, if you find something that you're interested in, there's a good chance that half of the board is going to be corporate people, and that's a great way to connect to people and then use them as a focus group to say, this is what I do for women, this is what I like to do, what do you think? And they'll say, oh yeah, this is how you can do it. The second one would just be to join certain organizations like, say, a sales and marketing organization, or there's employee branding engagement conferences, things that people go to, is to go to something like that. Sometimes you can do the exhibitions for free or for very little money. So you could spend 2-3 days wandering around, going to booths and talking to people and just getting an understanding of the language and the culture. And again, just seeing how your story resonates with what they want. So that's just an idea there. Does that make sense, Sarah?
Thank you. That's been really helpful. I don't mind talking for free. I don't mind that at all. So I'm definitely going to investigate those avenues. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And that is starting to wrap up our session here. We're at 2 o'clock already. Is there anyone on stage from the business winners who hasn't said something, who wants to throw something in before we wrap up? Let me just have a quick look. Otherwise, thank you all for Haig's business winners on stage, for the people who came out from the audience. Unfortunately, I see some other questions. We're out of time. We try and keep this to a power hour. Brian, it was an absolute pleasure to have you with us today to explore this topic and share your insights on corporate storytelling and so much more. So thank you, Brian.
Oh, thank you, Haig. It was fun. It was enjoyable, and yeah, I'd love to do it again if you want to ever do it again.
Again, everything we've discussed today will be available on our YouTube channel in a few days. We will be putting out some of the highlights and some of the things on LinkedIn and Instagram and other social platforms. We are back on Thursday, 9th of June, with an incredible guest, founder, dean, and former vice president of the University of Toyota, Mike Morrison, will be on here, a close friend of mine going back over 20 years. And we're going to be talking about some really, really interesting things. So watch and follow the social media. Me on LinkedIn. Connect with a lot of the people on stage, please, and follow them too. And I wish you all a fantastic and safe week or couple of weeks until we get back. So thank you, everybody. And again, once again, thank you, Brian, for a fantastic session. Look forward to seeing you here in London for the next one.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Haig. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Haig.
Thank you for listening to this session of Haig's Business Winners Club. Hit the subscribe button to stay updated with all the latest insightful business conversations from industry experts, leaders, and entrepreneurs.